Most people believe the biggest thing standing between them and wealth is a larger paycheck. I do not believe that. A larger paycheck can help. More income can create options, more capital can speed up progress. But if a person does not know how to connect money to judgment, judgment to opportunity, opportunity to relationships, and relationships to long-term leverage, then more money often just gives him a more expensive version of the same confusion. That is one of the hardest truths in finance. Money by itself is rarely the whole game. Money is only one part of a wider system. Career is part of that system. Business is part of it. Credit is part of it. The people around you are part of it. The kind of partner you choose is part of it. Your willingness to solve difficult problems is part of it. Your ability to distinguish a real profit engine from a pretty story is part of it. And if those things are weak, then even good income can leak away through bad structure, poor decisions, weak negotiation, wrong environments, and expensive habits. That is why I have always thought that what separates truly wealthy people from merely busy people is not only effort, it is judgment. The reference material you gave me is really saying that from many different angles. It talks about credit and access, about leverage and productive debt, about why hard work alone no longer guarantees wealth, about how to negotiate for more by understanding how you make a company money, about why the right business is a profit project rather than just a passion project, about how being around the right people changes behavior, and about how relationships can either multiply or drain financial progress. All of that points to one deeper principle. Wealth is not built from isolated tricks. It is built from connected judgment. Fayfelicite Fay turn 22 file 0 Fay Fayfelicite Fay turn 22 file 1 Fay Fayfelicite Fay turn 22 file 2 Fay Fayfelicite Fay turn 22 file 3 Fay Fayfelicite Fay turn 22 file 5 Fay. If I had to explain this in plain English, I would say it like this. A poor money system forces every part of life to fight alone. A strong money system makes each part strengthen the others. That is the entire game. A weak career produces weak cash flow. Weak cash flow creates weak choices. Weak choices make a person more likely to accept bad debt, stay in the wrong environment, avoid useful risks, enter stressed relationships, or chase opportunities from desperation, rather than strength. On the other hand, a stronger career can increase income. Higher income, used intelligently, can build credit, reserves, and access. Credit and reserves can make risk taking more rational. Better risk taking can create side businesses or investment opportunities. Better opportunities can improve where and with whom you spend your time. Better environments improve judgment and standards. And once judgment and standards improve, the next income decision often gets better too. That is how a system compounds. It does not happen because one magical event changes your life. It happens because several parts of life start reinforcing each other instead of quietly weakening each other. Most people never think this way. They isolate every money problem. They think, I need a raise, or I need a better credit score, or I need to start a business, or I need to invest, or I need a better partner. They treat each thing as separate. The truth is that none of these things are really separate. They are connected. And if you do not understand the connections, you will spend years fixing symptoms while the deeper pattern keeps producing more of the same results. That is why the first thing I want from anyone serious about wealth is not more hustle. It is better diagnosis. The source text says something very close to this when it explains that money is a language, and that if you do not understand it, you are not going to make more of it. That line is powerful because it goes beyond simple saving or spending. It implies that wealth is partly a comprehension problem. If you misread how credit works, how leverage works, how housing math works, how business capital works, how compensation works, and how people work, then you will keep making expensive decisions while believing you were simply unlucky. Fayfelicite Fay turn 22 file 0 Fay. I have seen that again and again. A person thinks he has an income problem. Really, he has a value creation problem. Another thinks she has a capital problem. Really, she has an access and finance problem. Another thinks he has a bad luck problem. Really, he has a pattern recognition problem. Another thinks she has a spending problem. Really, she has an environment problem, because every person around her normalizes a lifestyle that prevents saving, and another thinks he is not succeeding because he is not working hard enough. Really, he is working hard in a low-leverage position that no longer pays much for sheer effort. That is why I keep returning to judgment. Judgment is what lets you see which problem you actually have, and once you see the real problem, the next move becomes much more obvious. Take credit, for example. Many people see credit only as a temptation device. That is far too narrow. The source material makes a very strong point that credit, used well, creates access. It helps build the kind of financial reputation that later affects loans, business opportunities, housing, and even your ability to keep more cash available instead of freezing it in every transaction. That is bigger than just points or rewards. That is infrastructure. Fe filicite fe turn 22 file 3. Fe filicite fe turn 22 file 12 fe. But of course that same infrastructure becomes dangerous in the hands of a person who treats credit as permission to consume beyond reality. So what is the difference? Judgment, not the card, not the bank. Judgment. The same thing is true with debt more broadly. The source material is smart enough not to flatten debt into one moral category. It uses leverage as the deeper concept and points out that some borrowing is attached to productive assets, while other borrowing is attached to consumption. That distinction matters so much that I would say it is one of the central lines dividing adults from children in finance. Adults ask what the debt is attached to. Children ask only whether debt feels scary or exciting. Fe filicite, fe turn 22. File 3, fe debt attached to something that grows, produces cash flow, or expands useful capacity can be an intelligent tool. Debt attached to a rapidly depreciating lifestyle is often just future labor sold too cheaply. Again, the difference is judgment, and because judgment matters so much, I never trust people who speak about leverage in slogans. Leverage is not inherently smart. Leverage is not inherently foolish. Leverage reveals whether the person using it understands the game he is playing. Now let us move to work. This is where many people lose an enormous amount of time because they inherit the wrong script. They are told that the path upward is simple: work harder, be loyal, show up, put in the hours, and eventually someone will reward you. Sometimes that happens. Often it does not. The reference text says this much more honestly. It argues that hard work alone is no longer enough, especially in an AI-heavy world where average output becomes easier to replicate. What matters more is understanding the economics of what you do, being able to build or improve systems, having a distinctive knowledge stack, and moving from simple execution toward more strategic problem. Solving that is exactly right. Fe filicite fe turn 22 file 2 fe. I do not say that to dismiss effort. Effort matters, but effort without leverage is often underpaid. And the person who never learns that ends up exhausted and confused, wondering why admiration for his work ethic did not turn into ownership, higher income, or freedom. That is why I love the bricklayer, builder, architect, city planner ladder in the source material. It gives a clean way to think about modern value creation. The bricklayer works inside the job. The builder combines pieces. The architect designs systems. The city planner understands whole ecosystems. Money tends to move upward with perspective, not only with sweat. That is one of the deepest things in the entire source file. Fe filicite fe turn 22 file 2 fe. Once you understand that, your relationship to your job changes. You no longer ask only how hard am I working. You start asking what level of problem am I solving? How visible is the value I create? Can I explain how I make the company money? Can I expand that value? Can I move toward more leverage, more design, more judgment, and more ownership? The source material puts this into very practical compensation advice too. If you want to ask for more money as an employee, first understand exactly how you make the company money, then make them more money, then negotiate. That is adult thinking, not please notice how hard I try, but here is the economic case for my value. Fe filicite fe turn 22 file 0 fe. That is another system link. Better judgment around work improves income. Better income used wisely improves flexibility. Flexibility improves decision quality. Decision quality improves the next opportunity. This is how compounding actually feels in life. Not just a line on a stock chart, a chain of increasingly better options created by increasingly better judgment. Now, business. This is another area where people get trapped by myths. They think starting a business requires first having a lot of money, or they think every passion deserves to become a company. The source material does something very valuable here. It breaks the myth that you always need your own money first by pointing out that grants, loans, outside capital, and other funding mechanisms exist if the economics are real enough. At the same time, it warns people not to confuse a passion project with a profit project and not to quit the job too early just to perform entrepreneurship. That is balanced advice, which is rarer than it should be. Fe filicite fe turn 22 file 1 fe. I respect balance. Us is not a diary entry with invoices. A business is a machine that must produce more value than it consumes. Sometimes your passion is economically strong. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes your best move is to keep the salary while the business earns the right to become your main thing. That is not cowardice. That is intelligent runway management. The source text even points to data showing people often do better when they keep employment while building, because survival pressure distorts decisions. That rings very true to me. When every month is a life or death referendum, people often pick emotionally urgent moves over economically sound ones. Fay file a site. Fay turn 22 file 1 Fay once again. The real issue is not money in isolation, it is judgment linked to structure. The person with judgment says, how do I lower the chance of a stupid death for this idea? The person without it says, how do I make my life story sound bold? That difference matters more than most people realize. And if you understand that, then you start seeing why environment matters so much too. The source material says that being around higher earning, more ambitious, more financially engaged people often increases your own earnings and investing behavior. That makes perfect sense. Humans are social imitators, standards are contagious, timidity is contagious too. If everybody around you treats money as chaotic, resents growth, avoids numbers, and confuses consumption with success, your life will absorb those scripts almost by accident. Fay file a site, Fay turn 22 file 5 Fay. I have always thought environment is one of the most underrated financial multipliers. The right environment does not hand you money. It changes what seems normal, what seems possible, what seems embarrassing, what seems admirable, and once those social defaults change, behavior follows much faster than people expect. That is why a strong environment often produces stronger careers, stronger businesses, stronger standards, and even stronger relationships. Relationships matter here more than people like to admit. Money is deeply emotional, and the person you choose to build a life with will shape not only your costs, but your stress level, your time horizon, your resilience, and your ability to keep making good long-term decisions. The source text gets into this in a provocative way, talking about dating, partnership, wealth statistics for married couples, and the fact that who you choose is not financially neutral. I agree with the deeper point. A stable and mutually disciplined partnership can become one of the strongest economic advantages in adult life. A chaotic relationship can consume resources, focus, and ambition on a scale that people usually only recognize after the damage is done. Fay felicite Fay turn 22 file 0 Fay. That does not mean choosing a partner only for economics. It means acknowledging economics are part of life architecture, whether you discuss them or not. And one of the most useful things in the source material is the small example about splitting a dinner bill when you are trying to save. That may sound trivial, but it is not trivial at all. Financial boundaries in small situations are rehearsal for financial boundaries. In large situations, a person who cannot say, I am not spending that way tonight, will struggle to say no in much more expensive contexts later. Fay felicite Fay turn 22 file 5. Fay again, judgment. Judgment about money is not only spreadsheet work, it is social work, boundary work, environment work, identity work. That is why so many people stay confused even after they learn a few financial buzzwords. They think fluency is vocabulary. It is not. Fluency is being able to see how multiple forces interact and then choosing accordingly. Take housing. The source text is very clear that the old script around buying a house may not fit current reality in many markets. It even says renting can sometimes be the more intelligent move, especially if you negotiate well and invest the difference. I think that is the sort of clear-eyed arithmetic more people need, because housing is not just shelter, it is often the largest concentration of cash flow and capital in a household. If you inherit a bad housing script, the damage echoes everywhere else. Fay felicite Fay turn 22 file 0 Fay. The same is true in markets. The source text uses the familiar Buffett idea about being greedy when others are fearful, but what matters is not merely repeating the quote. What matters is understanding why most people fail to act on it. They fail because they have no spare capital, no emotional control, or no conviction built from understanding. In other words, they do not have the surrounding system that allows courage to be rational. That is very important. Being calm in fear is not a slogan. It is a structural advantage built ahead of time. Fay felicite Fay turn 22 file 0 Fay. This is why I say wealth is a connected judgment system. Credit affects access, access affects opportunity. Opportunity affects income, income affects reserves, reserves affect courage, courage affects timing, timing affects asset quality affects long-term freedom, environment affects judgment, relationships affect focus, focus affects execution, execution affects confidence, confidence affects the next opportunity. Everything talks to everything else. And if one part of the system is weak, it often weakens the others. But the reverse is also true. Strength becomes reinforcing. This is why I do not believe the right answer is simply earn more. The right answer is make the whole system more intelligent. Sometimes that means improving your understanding of credit. Sometimes it means leaving a weak environment. Sometimes it means negotiating like an adult. Sometimes it means not quitting the job too early. Sometimes it means learning to solve higher level problems. Sometimes it means admitting the relationship is costing more than it gives. Sometimes it means seeing that your hobby is not yet a business. Sometimes it means asking whether the thing everyone around you says is normal is actually rational. That is what judgment looks like. It is not glamorous. It is connected. Now, if I had to reduce the whole philosophy to one message, it would be this. Do not ask only how to make more money. Ask how to make your whole system produce better financial outcomes. Because once you ask the bigger question, the smaller ones become easier. Should I use credit? Depends on whether you can manage it and what future access it builds. Should I take debt? Depends on what it is attached to. Should I buy the house? Depends on the numbers and the life, not the slogan. Should I start the business? Depends on whether it is a profit engine or just a story. Should I ask for more pay? Depends on whether you can show economic value clearly. Should I move cities, change friend groups, date differently, work differently, spend differently perhaps? If the system is weak, those are not side issues. They are the issue. That is what I admire about the source material at its best. Beneath all the anecdotes and examples, it is really telling the reader to stop viewing money as an isolated target and start viewing life as a network of financial consequences. That is a much more mature way to think. Fay Felicite Fay Turn 22 File 0 Fay Felicite Fay Turn 22 File 1 Fay Felicite Fay Turn 22 File 2 Fay Felicite Fay Turn 22 File 5 Fay. And once you think that way, wealth stops looking magical. It starts looking architectural, not easy, but buildable, not random, but responsive to judgment, not immediate, but deeply compounding once the parts begin to reinforce one another. That is where I think true wealth begins, not with one giant check with one connected decision after another.